The gospel reading on the second Sunday of Advent is the gospel according to Luke. We'll be reading from chapter 1, verses 39 to 45, and then 56 to 66. You can find that if you'd like to follow along on page 57 of the back portion of your red pew Bible. The gospel according to Luke. In those days, Mary set out and went with haste to a Judean town in the hill country, where she entered the house of Zechariah and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the child leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit and exclaimed with a loud cry, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And why has this happened to me, that the mother of my Lord comes to me? For as soon as I heard the sound of your greeting, the child in my womb leaped for joy. And blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord." And now verses 56 to 66. And Mary remained with Elizabeth about 3 months and then returned to her home. Now the time came for Elizabeth to give birth, and she bore a son. Her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown his great mercy to her, and they rejoiced with her. On the 8th day, they came to circumcise the child, and they were going to name him Zechariah after his father. But his mother said, "No, he is to be called John." They said to her, "None of your relatives has this name." Then they began motioning to his father to find out what name he wanted to give him. He asked for a writing tablet and wrote, "His name is John." And all of them were amazed. Immediately his mouth was opened and his tongue freed, and he began to speak, praising God. Well, fear came over all the neighbors, and all of these things were talked about throughout the entire hill country of Judea. All who heard them pondered them and said, "What then will this child become?" For indeed the hand of the Lord was with him. Gracious God, give us eyes to see and ears to hear and hearts that are open to receive and respond to your message, your word to us this day. Amen. Is peace possible? Is peace possible in a divided nation? Is peace possible when we face conflict, when we find ourselves in difficult circumstances or situations? Well, we hope so. That is what award-winning photographer John Nolter believed as he set out on a 40,000-mile road trip across the United States to rediscover the common humanity that connects us. He did so by asking people one simple question: what does peace mean to you? And through some difficult conversations, some playful humor, and a very keen eye for beauty, Nolter produced an inspiring book called Portraits of Peace. I highly recommend it. It might make a nice Christmas gift as well. His work captures a rich collage of who we are as a nation. His beautiful storytelling and captivating photography converge to offer a very uniquely human and accessible examination of all the social issues that challenge us today. But he approaches the humanity of these issues by asking each person and respecting their answers that question: what does peace mean to you? And so I ask you to consider for a moment, what does peace mean to you in this stage of life, in this season of the year? And where do you need peace the most? John discovered through real-world stories of ordinary citizens, these citizens who choose amid difficult circumstances to pursue healing, and reconciliation and community building, that we discover a glimmer of hope that something better is possible for us, for our nation, for our world. Now, our Advent story is also a portrait of an ordinary citizen in extraordinary times. Someone who chose to pursue healing and community and solidarity while adjusting to a very new and disorienting reality. This week's Advent story is Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth follows a lineage and legacy of women of faith. And if you recall from our fall sermon series, Women of the Book, there were other women like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Hannah. These women specifically were all barren and childless until God intervened. Well, that's true about Elizabeth. She was married to a priest named Zachariah. And in the Gospel of Luke, before the verses we read these words. Both of them were righteous before God, living blamelessly according to all the commandments of the Lord. But they had no children because Elizabeth was barren, and both were getting on in years. And then the story goes that while Zachariah, the priest, was in the sanctuary coming to worship, God sent an angelic messenger saying these words, "Do not be afraid, Zachariah, for your prayers have been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear a son, and you will name him John. You will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He will turn many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God." But this story is about Elizabeth and Elizabeth's younger cousin named Mary. The passage that we read talks about when they came together and Mary visited Elizabeth. These are women chosen at inconvenient times of their lives to bring two children, Jesus and John, into the world. And as we now know the story, of course, the angel Gabriel tells Mary that this additional miracle is happening alongside her own, that her elder and elderly cousin Elizabeth, after a lifetime of unanswered prayer, and now well past childbearing years, is also pregnant. So when Mary gets this news, she goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth for a while. Their time together is known as the Visitation. Now, there's a painting called The Visitation. It was brought to my attention by a friend of mine who I met while I served at the American Church in Paris. Anuma Okora is a Nigerian-born American, and she served as our theologian in residence. And she's authored many books, including a great resource for Advent entitled Silence and Other Surprising Invitations of Advent. And in one of her blog posts, she talks about this amazing painting by Vermont-based artist Janet McKenzie. Some of you I know are familiar with her work. And in this amazing painting called The Visitation, it's a contemporary depiction of this scene that we read this morning. You have these two women, Elizabeth and Mary, standing together, holding one another, but still in their own separate internal worlds. Now, Enuma writes these words about the painting. Mackenzie's work blends her pull towards spirituality with her commitment to highlighting the supportive journeys of women and a diversity of people. In this painting, Mary and Elizabeth are majestically tall and slender, wrapped in swaths and scarves. Mary's blue covering hangs sort of down from her bent arm. And there's a quiet dignity to both of the women as they stand with their eyes closed, as if they are meditating on their realities. The realities outside of them and the realities growing within them. Now, Elizabeth has her hand resting on Mary's belly, and Mary's visible hand is held against her own cheek. And behind are two lines on the wall that shape a cross. There are also crosses painted on Mary's shawl, symbolic, of course, of the unimaginable pain and sacrificial love that is to come later on. But for now, in this painting, these women are saying yes to their own sacrifices, trusting that the disruption of their lives will be worth whatever is to come. This painting illuminates the powerful act of simply standing as a witness to the trials and the triumphs of another person's life, even amid one's own trials and triumphs. Now, the narrative that we read leaves out much of the information concerning the space between Mary and Elizabeth in their weeks and months together. Perhaps we can imagine what they did, what they shared together in this space. They shared their excitement as well as their fears, their possible anxieties and insecurities. Are they up for the task that these angelic messengers have given to them? What will this be like? What will others say? Am I worthy enough? Do I have what it takes? Can we get through this together? I'm sure, even with the level of faith that they both possessed, and we read a bit about Elizabeth's faith today, and we'll look to Mary in a few weeks, I'm sure that they had moments, if not days, of restlessness, of worry, of anticipation. But Elizabeth and Mary could strengthen one another's hearts. Perhaps they prayed together regularly. Maybe the wisdom of Elizabeth's years provided comfort and security to a frightened yet courageous Mary, who was probably mid-teens, and Elizabeth was much older. There's value of these intergenerational relationships, that those who have more experience can provide wisdom and comfort and advice to those who are younger. Now, Advent is truly a time to wait on God. But I think it's also a good time to dwell in friendship, in holy friendship. Ultimately, we know that we are called to be friends with God. That's the miracle, the gift of Christmas. And we can imitate this divine call to friendship when we practice sharing ourselves and sharing our stories with one another. I really believe that friendship is another way of being in covenant with God. Our communities need more friendships like that. The truth is, we can endure very little in life without the support of friends. Friends who care about you, to hold space for you. Friends who will stand with you in your trials and your triumphs. Friends who will choose to be open and vulnerable. And when you experience that, it does something that's powerful. It relieves the weight of carrying our burdens alone. Because the truth is, we are not alone. We are never alone. And friends can remind us of that promise. This Advent season, I encourage all of us to take a moment to sit quietly, if you can find that space, and prayerfully reflect on the friends that you have in your life. Friends who remind you of who you are. Friends who challenge you to live into who you are called to be. Friends who accept you at every stage of journey. Because these friends mirror God's love and God's friendship to us. And then in what ways can you be a friend to someone else? Someone who might need your presence in this season of life. And maybe it is someone who is older, maybe it is someone who is younger. See, at times life brings a mixture of pain and blessing. And this was true for Elizabeth in her life. Sometimes these come in the same package. And for some of us, and for a variety of reasons, there are roles and responsibilities that we've been called to, even when we don't feel equipped or ready for them. Maybe you find yourself in one of those places right now. Something that you feel that you're being called towards. And you're not sure if you have the courage or the strength or are equipped for the journey ahead. But like Elizabeth and like Mary, we are invited into the story. It might be a surprising but a holy invitation in this season. And we're invited into the story not just as an observer, but as an active participant. And all of us, held by God's grace and joined together in this covenant of love, we, like Elizabeth and Mary, can stand in solidarity and support, walking with one another, walking with each other in harmony. So may their portrait of peace be an example for us to follow, to take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with you and me.